about vulnerability, and to
Hmm.
me, vulnerability is just about being human and just remembering that everybody else that you're around are all are all
Right.
humans. So it's like it's weird to me to hear somebody say, "Oh my gosh, I can't," how brave of you, or I wish I could be that that open and brave. And then I go, feels really weird to hear that sometimes. But then I remember I've been in that place, and I think now my mind shift has changed so much to just by remembering that everybody's human.
Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I am just feeling really good about bringing an amazing person full of light and energy to you today, my friend Anne Nevel. Anne, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am excellent. Getting to chat with you, just it's a great way to start the day, and you bring so much sunshine into the world and positivity and just good vibes. So I'm in a good place. So, Anne, thanks for joining us. We're gonna tell the world what you do in a little bit, and we're gonna pick on you about what your awkward is. But first, I like to just ask all my guests, what's the most positive thing that you see going on right now in the world?
Oh gosh, the most positive thing I see going on in the world. Interestingly, this is kind of weird. I maybe because I tend to look at things from a positive perspective. Um, I think that I've seen a lot of positives come out of the pandemic, out of COVID, and the connectedness that came from it. I think I've seen it in so many different ways and so many different places that people, I think, even doing what we're doing right now and having a conversation and being on Zoom, I didn't do that with my family members. Like,
Right.
isn't it weird? Like I was
Yeah.
doing it with colleagues, but I didn't think to do it with family members. And I know there's things like FaceTime came before that, but even then, like I just wasn't really thinking about like having these kinds of connected calls with more people. Like I feel like I
Mhm.
I was doing it before, and I feel like people felt the need to do it and get more connected because we just kind of we slowed down and had that opportunity to do that. So I guess that's what I would say. I do feel that we're all more a little more, ironically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's really insightful because I feel like before the pandemic we used the technology out of necessity and in the way of, if I have to have a Zoom meeting, that's what I have to do because that's how we're going to connect for business. But same way, I wouldn't have had a Zoom call with family who I wouldn't see as often. And there's no reason why I couldn't have Zoomed with somebody who was out of the geography just to stay connected, or even if they're just an hour away, where it's like, oh, we're not going to get to see each other for a month. Let's at least get on a
Yeah.
video call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And that's so true that there is, whether you call it a silver lining or the things that come out of the challenges that we face, but that's
Yeah.
why we have to face the challenges, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I love the feeling of connectedness, which reminds me, we just met being connected at Encounter 360. Shout out to Dennis Pitoko for putting that together. Um,
Absolutely.
that was
Awesome.
an amazing chance to actually meet somebody in person who we've talked a little bit off and on. We've had a couple video chats, and to actually be in the same room where you're like, oh wait, this is really a real person.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
yeah, and I don't know about you, but being at events that are in person have actually re-engaged my online presence.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it definitely does. It's kind of a cycle.
Hmm.
It's kind of an interesting cycle. And it does, it creates a little bit again back to that connected piece. Yeah, it like it makes you more connected. Like you connect, you have that opportunity to could, be together in person, and then it makes that connection online even richer, right?
Definitely. I love that theme of connectedness. I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. But let's dive right into it. And Anne, I gotta know, what's your awkward thing? What is that thing that you have had to own in order to be this amazing person you are?
So, okay, so it's interesting because I don't know if I would have been able to identify this and say it out and talk about it out loud if it weren't for someone kind of soliciting quirks. Like, she used the word quirk, which also like is awkward. What
Right.
is that thing that makes you a little bit different? And when I offered up to her what I thought my thing was, because I was like, wow, somebody asked this and I think I want to share this, was growing up. There's a couple of different things, and I shared more of it. I'll share more of it with you today, because one of them was um, growing up poor.
Mm,
And I didn't think that that was necessarily an awkward or a quirk or made me weird or anything. It didn't make me,
right.
I didn't necessarily think that made me awkward. Um, and then, in addition to that, my dad was incarcerated. So that's something I don't say out loud a lot.
Sure.
And and that was part of the whole cycle. My mom was raising 4 kids by herself,
Yeah.
because that happened, and then they got divorced, and it was it wasn't a long time, just a lot of messiness, and
Hmm.
a lot of my mom worked really hard to raise 4 kids, and still we struggled a lot. Um, and I think that, as a kid, it made it really awkward because I I didn't know, it made me feel awkward at school. Often got my clothes were hand me downs from my mom would get like bags of clothes from people at work. And that was how we got our clothes often. I mean, we did get to go. My mom worked she worked for basically a large department store. I'm just not gonna, I don't know why I don't want to say it, but she did. But she worked in a warehouse. So that
Okay.
was the other piece. My
Yeah.
mom worked in the warehouse, and because of that, we got to go shopping at this place, and we got discounts and things like that. So we did get some things from there. So I don't want to make it sound like it was always, but a lot of my clothes, I also got, I'm the youngest. So I got a lot of hand me downs.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And, my mom, because she worked in a warehouse, she wasn't doing what a lot of my friends' moms were doing. And,
Hmm.
she would come, we were also always very active. So that's something I'm very thankful for. We were always very active, but my mom would come like in maybe for work uniform. She might be a little dirty or whatever. I'm going to try not to get sad because my mom is not with us now. And it makes me sad to think that I was ever embarrassed or felt awkward because of that. But I did. And, obviously I never talked about my dad other than the fact that he wasn't around. Um, that's only happened, a couple over the last couple of years. Um, but yeah, just that general place of just feeling like, maybe I don't fit in because I don't have, the really nice clothes, and we didn't really have a whole lot. I did still have a lot of friends, but I was always really uncomfortable with that piece of it. And then I think as I grew up, it kind of led into the workplace too, like people sharing experiences about going to summer camp or going on all these family vacations or a country club or different
Right.
things that I didn't have experience with. And I thought that, as an adult and as a professional, that I'm supposed to like kind of try to fit in. So it wasn't until really recently that I started realizing that, that's kind of my awkward that I felt like I tried to hide as a kid, and as an adult and as a professional, that maybe people don't think about, but
Yeah.
still comes up very regularly. And I do think it's helped now that I've shared it. I will. Can I
Uh,
share that? Am I
yeah.
saying way too much, or can I share
No, you're
that?
there.
Like,
I've got questions I'm gonna come back at you with, but don't hold back.
because it then tied into a lot of things. So this is the book that I ended up being a character in because I started sharing that story that I thought wasn't nearly important. This is me.
Oh no.
Um,
And it's
I thought,
You've got
I,
quirks. Can you just tell us the name of the book for people who aren't
oh,
watching?
oh,
because some people
Oh
will
yeah.
just,
Oh, sorry. You've got quirks and you're wonderful is what it's called by
I love
Kristen
that.
Sherry. So Kristen, after we had a conversation, I even said to her, I'm like, I don't know if this is really gonna qualify for, being a part of your story that you're creating. But she said, no, I love that story and I definitely want to share it. And
Love that.
so it then made me realize, I think that yeah, it made me realize it was something important that I needed to share, and just being a part of that book. And then got me to sharing my story with my colleagues and realized that it's okay,
Mhm.
that I'm not awkward, that maybe other people have those same experiences. And, and even in the story, it does talk about, sharing what your awkward is and letting kids know that they're wonderful. And that was the lesson for me, was that I internalized a lot of that as a kid and maybe even as an adult, and had to eventually acknowledge that I don't own those things and it's not who I am, and that my mom was really hardworking and I actually learned that from her, and she treated people with respect and she was kind. And I grew up to apparently be a pretty kind, hardworking person, and
Yeah.
have not acknowledged that people like me that way. So yeah,
I love
that's
that.
it.
There are so many thoughts going through my head right now about your journey, and I'm gonna sort them out on the air, and think through where to start, because I think that that is such a beautiful place that you've gotten to with being able to acknowledge it. And a couple things that came to mind while you were sharing that was, number one, how strong your mom was. And I wonder, like, um did that develop your work ethic to see how your mom had to kind of keep life together for four kids and work? How did that play into the you know the boundaries and levels and goals that you've set for yourself?
Yeah, it absolutely, absolutely has played into who I am and the work ethic that I have. And so that's the part where, like I said, I was trying not to get sad, because at the time I didn't see it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, my mom was, like, doesn't work like my other friends' moms work, or even their dads. And like, I hear all
Yeah.
these great stories about what their parents did. And I didn't realize at the time what a great opportunity I had to gain that work ethic from her. I definitely work very hard. I also don't have a lot of maybe sympathy for for things, because I have such a strong feelings about it. At the
Yeah.
same time, I do. I'm absolutely able to. I'm someone who supports colleagues in the concept of trying to, have a life outside of work. I won't say the phrase that I don't know is necessarily true, work life balance. I don't know that said it, but the idea. I don't work constantly either, and I do accept, acknowledge that there's life outside of work. And I'm a very hard worker, and I'm very driven. And I now realize, oh my gosh, how in the world did my mom raise four kids? Like, I can, at times in my life, up until now,
Yeah.
sometimes I'm even like, how do I take care of myself? And I'm doing okay. How did my mom, as
Yeah.
someone working in a warehouse, how in the world did she make all of that work? And it was, a lot of sacrifice by all means. And like I said, we didn't always have everything, but I never felt like I went without.
Mm.
So that's also another really important thing that I learned, was that you can, you can make a lot of things work, and a lot of things, which is why I guess I didn't talk about it a lot. It wasn't always evident. I did still. I was
Mhm.
never without, just maybe doing things a little differently.
Right. Now, I'm curious, was there something that led you to actually start speaking out and sharing that?
I think it's a couple of things. I think one, like I said, that the book was kind of started it, and then I'll say there's a few things. The book, then hearing someone say one time, so if there's going to be another word besides awkward, weird, someone used the phrase, your weird is how you come to serve others.
Mm,
And
yeah.
it really resonated with me. And I thought, huh, yes, I need to be using that because I
Yeah.
am a helper, I am a giver, and I feel that strong need to do that.
Hmm.
I often do. And interestingly, some of my volunteerism is very related to where I came from.
Sure.
It comes full circle. And so it just was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm actually on the board for a nonprofit called Assisting Families of Inmates.
Mhm.
Um, but not like consciously, like these things just
Just
came full circle. And I was
yeah.
like, oh, so
Funny how
it was
that happens.
that. Yeah, it was that. And then I think just in general, like it being uh, something that's happening in the working world where it's more acceptable and like, just talking about
Sure.
diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, mental health awareness, like all of these things, like we're starting to pay more attention to people as humans
Hmm.
and so that's kind of opened the door too for me to be able to feel comfortable talking with my colleagues, I think.
Yeah. I think that's a great I love that quote about like your weird is the empowering thing essentially that gives people power because for when I'm working with people about their awkward thing, I'm constantly talking about your insecurity is your superpower. And in the past, I feel like there was a focus and a concentration on being invincible and showing up and not letting anybody see any weakness at all. But it's actually the opposite is true. When people see all the great things you have done with challenges, it shows how much stronger you are because it's like, wait, Anne's made it through this. This didn't get her down. This didn't hold her back. She's invincible. Like, holy crap. Like if I never saw you with a challenge, it would be like, oh, sure, of course. You haven't had to work your muscles. How strong is that?
Yeah, right, right. That's a really good point. I
Yeah.
like that.
I
Yeah.
heard one time, and this just really stuck with me. And I don't know the climbing facts, so someone on the internet is going to prove me wrong. But I do know that Mount Everest being the tallest mountain in the world, Denali is actually um, a bigger mountain in height because
Okay.
it starts at sea level and elevates. So
Uh,
have to make a bigger climb to climb Denali if you're going from ground level up. And so, you look at people where it's like, oh, sure, well, if you start here, that's great and it looks good, you got that medal, but what if you're starting with even bigger challenges? It even becomes more impressive. So when you see people who have the classic rags to riches story, or I think this is why when we watch, I think this is why people really relate to the TV shows like America's Got Talent or American Idol, where they're showing the backstory, and then we want to root for that person that had these struggles because it's like, oh, I want them to win. And when I watch the show, I'm like, I don't want the backstory. I just want to see the talent.
yeah.
But it does endear you to the person when you know what they've gone through to get to where they are.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because as I was hearing you say that, I know something else I struggled with is I didn't want people to feel sympathetic for me. I
Mm,
didn't want
yeah.
people to feel sorry for me. I think that's also another big reason why I don't always share all of these, and because I'm not going to say I'm over this, not by any means. I just
Yeah.
like got a little bit nervous saying what I did to you at the beginning because I don't. I still don't say all of these things because I don't want anybody to be like, oh, that's something I've acknowledged. I had a really rough year this last year with losing important people in my life, and I
Mhm.
didn't want to necessarily share that initially, but then I realized it helps other people too. So I do think again back to the like,
Right.
yeah, it's a weird place to be because you don't want I don't necessarily want somebody to be how or like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for you, but it's
Yeah.
also an important part of my journey.
Yeah, we want
So
people to see our value because of our true value and our talents, and not like no one wants a pity vote.
right,
I don't want you to
right,
hire me because that's just patronizing, and then that has the opposite effect
yeah,
of, well,
yeah,
so if I don't have something bad happen in my life, then I'm not going to get support or help or business. Like, how about just you like me and you want to support me? So cool.
Yeah. But I think that we can help each other and we can help others by showing, especially like we were just talking, at the very beginning, we're talking about positivity and seeing the silver lining. So
Right.
my hope is that it helps people to be able to do that instead of saying, oh, COVID just ruined everything for me, and
Right.
oh, woe is me. Maybe they can look at it if I share like things that happened to me and where I am now and the positivity that I have and the good things that I took out of it, and maybe help them to realize that like it's not all
Yeah. And
doom and gloom.
I'm a big fan, and we believe what we're told and we believe what we tell ourselves. And if we keep saying, oh, COVID did this to me, COVID did that to me, I'm living in this space where I am choosing to stay a victim to this thing that's out of my control. And if I change that dialogue in my head and say, well, I learned this from COVID, or COVID maybe changed the direction, but these are the things that I did from that. I used the time to do A, B, and C. And maybe it was as simple as take a much needed break from the rat race and recharge my batteries or find a new hobby. Like there's value in that. It doesn't have to be, I started a new business and launched 5 patents and trademarks and whatever, which some people did, and that's great. But maybe you just needed to step out of things and recenter yourself, and that can help you emerge in a beautiful way. So, so I am curious, how have you noticed since you have started sharing, how has that changed things for you in your life and relationships and forward movement?
You know, I don't know about you, but it makes things really easy. I mean, if you can think about, you think about, oh man, I got to cover this, 24 hours a day, every day, every day I've got to pretend to be something else, and I got to be careful I don't say that, or, I feel like hopefully people are able to just kind of, I feel better. I feel freer. I feel like I'm me. I feel like I'm able to be myself, and I'm able to just say, this is what you got, and this is why. I mean, I think too, I think you get something special because I
Right.
am me.
Yeah.
And if I'm not, then you're getting something else. I don't know. It's interesting because I used to, I used to think that was a hindrance because I didn't have those backgrounds, that same background to bring forward. Instead, now I'm just like, all right, teach me. Like I remember even first work flight I was going on. I mean, just all the things that like I'm like, oh, I gotta act like I know what I'm doing. Instead, it's much easier to be like, hey, I have no idea. I
Yeah.
did not grow up in the country club, and please tell me how this, or
Right.
whatever it is. I mean, that's an exaggeration probably, but it is really freeing to be able to say, okay, this is really who you're getting. I think it helps everybody. I think it helps them feel more comfortable too, to know how to, how to like communicate with people.
Yeah, because if we show up putting on this facade that we know what we're doing and we know I'm supposed to know how this works, and then we're faking it, then it creates frustration on the part of others because they've now have this expectation that you don't need any help, or that you don't, that what is supposed to happen. And when all of a sudden it becomes, wait, Anne doesn't know that she has to take her shoes off at the airport or whatever. Feel like, how do you not know that? I thought you knew this. And that's where the judgment comes in, because the disconnect comes in on what you projected you understood versus what people expected from that.
Absolutely. The other thing it does, whether I have to share it or not, but it helps me to relate to other people who maybe experience some of those same feelings, and I may sense that they are, or I don't sense it, but I'm more open. I'm more likely to assume that somebody may not know like those things, and I'm like, hey, how about we share these things with them, because maybe they don't know how to do that because they don't have the same experiences that you had.
Right. When you started mentioning that difference, you used the word easy. And I think that is such a simple, basic word that it gets overlooked. And it should be easy. Life should be easy in a lot of ways. Like when we're trying to be ourselves and do our things, it should be easy, it should be fun. And it doesn't mean we're never going to have a challenge, but I think we make it way harder than we need to by creating these obstacles for ourselves. And like you said, just removing that, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't have to focus on all this pretending. I can just be me.
Right.
Who knew?
Right. I know exactly. It's like if that doesn't work out, okay, that's all right. It is funny though. I mean, I do think of some of the things that like people have said to me, thinking that they're upsetting, but I'm just like, whatever. That's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you get. And generally, it makes me. I mean, I've always been pretty transparent. Even that kind of stuff. Like I've always been curious, and I've always asked questions.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think anytime we're trying to kind of tamper down who we are is very uncomfortable. And
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. As you were telling that story about like maybe not knowing what the motions are or what to do, I I thought of I've become a fan lately of just saying I don't know what questions to ask. Because people say, "Oh, do you have any questions?" Like, I don't even know that I know enough information to know where to start. So sometimes it's like, well, what are the questions people are usually asking in this situation? Because I wouldn't think that I need to do X, Y, and Z. And so I think that you know, being able to just honestly say, I don't know not much in this area. This is new to me, and not have that then not relate that to us devaluing our whole selves as a person, where it's like, okay, if I don't know about this one thing, that doesn't mean that I'm not an expert in 10 other areas. Or
Oh,
but
heck yeah. I could tell you about a lot of interesting things that you may not have come into, may not have come into your life for whatever reason. That's where, yeah, right.
yeah. So how
That's
did
funny.
that feel being in a book? Like you're a character in a book that had to that had to just kind of, was it like
Uh,
exciting? Was it nerve-wracking? Was like, oh gosh, the whole world's gonna see everything now?
right. Isn't that crazy? Okay. So that's the, I get a little excited. Okay. So that's
Oh,
my
look, there's
picture.
your picture. So for our
Yeah.
listeners, you got to go watch the video because you can see Anne's page. And actually, you don't even have to watch the video. Just go buy the book. There's a link in the description of the video. You can buy a copy, support Kristen and learn more about Anne.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's a really cool thing. Um, Social media, right? So Facebook, on Facebook lives all those people that I was childhood friends with
Yeah.
that didn't, that I was so nervous around them knowing, the popular girls and
Yeah.
the boys, everybody. Like
Mhm.
I didn't really, maybe they did know, maybe they were looking at judging. I have no idea. But sometimes maybe I did. Yes, I'm not gonna lie. Yes, I did know at times. There were the mean girls.
Mhm.
Um, and all those people are, even some of the mean girls because we grew up,
Mhm.
um, and they're on my Facebook. And so that's the place, where when I put that out there, it was, oh gosh, all those people that I was friends with as kids are going to see this,
Yeah.
this story about me as a kid. My siblings, also my siblings, what are they going to
Yeah.
think and sharing our family story? I
Yeah.
don't
And are they
talk about
ready and comfortable
everything.
for it to be shared?
Yeah, it's really short. It's a kid's story. It's a
Sure.
kid's
Yeah.
book. So as you saw, that was the whole thing. That was 2 pages.
Yeah.
That was my whole story. There's really amazing stories. I think you would really appreciate it. There's stories about different people, which is also why I thought my story didn't fit. I'm like, I don't know. We're just poor. Like that was just it. I wasn't missing, I wasn't missing limbs. I didn't have a stutter. I wasn't, um,
Yeah.
didn't have some discoloration of my skin or hair or whatever it might be that like were very interestingly. Those are, I guess maybe that's part of the difference in my story was it wasn't necessarily external, other than maybe some of the clothes I wore or whatever.
Yeah, it
It was
wouldn't
an
be an
internal
obvious
thing.
thing where people could pick you out of a lineup and say, well, this is what Anne's quirk is. We can see it, but it makes
Right,
it almost
right,
trickier because
exactly.
then you don't get the benefit of people knowing, oh, she has this thing.
Yeah, yeah. So So yeah, so there were a lot of those things, and like I said, the story's really short. It's basically saying, that doesn't you can still grow up and be, a good, kind, successful person, and you're pretty awesome the way you
Yeah.
are. But still, I recommend people read it and share it with kids. It's great. There's a whole series of books about you've got skills, you've got gifts, personality, like all of those kinds of things for kids. And but super cool to have a cartoon character as myself.
Yeah. I
So
know.
that
It's
part
adorable. It's awesome.
is really fun. And then, like I said, it is interesting. There's also, I think I don't know this for sure, but for example, some of those kids that I went to school with that had their own awkward were
Right.
probably able to see it too. And I'm close to at least one of those people that I know and I remember in
Mhm.
school, how things were. And it probably even just made her a little more endeared to me,
Okay.
maybe,
Yeah.
you
That's
know?
yeah. I love that you mentioned that feeling of having this now be out there in front of your older group, your group that was from back in the day. Because we hear all this talk about find your tribe, create your community, and we do that, but it doesn't mean that we always completely leave behind other pockets. And maybe our center core group that we're with now is more aligned in certain ways with where we're at, or they know this part of our story and they know me now that I've come to terms with everything in life and I'm just, awesome and whatever. But I feel like when we step back into those other groups, you go to the reunion or you go to the family reunion or whatever it is, and then it's sometimes easy to revert to that. Well, this is my role with this group of people, and
Yeah.
it's a challenge to actually say, well, no, I'm actually not going to be nervous about that because this is who I am now, and if they can take it or leave it at this point in my
Yeah.
life. But
Yeah.
yeah. So did you get, I'm just curious, and you don't have to obviously share anything you don't want to, but I'm curious if you got feedback from anybody who knew you before you were just brilliantly okay with life and was like, wow, Anne, I like that's a whole thing that I never even saw.
Um, you know, sort of, not a lot, not a
Hmm.
lot. I would say, I think I kind of expected my siblings to be a little bit more weirded out by it than
Uh-huh.
anything,
Sure.
and they weren't. Um, and if anything, I had some people just really seem like they really maybe opened up to me more,
Okay.
both in that case and in my professional life, where I had people, at come to me and share their own stories. So I think it was more about that than I think there was a little bit. There definitely I don't know. I have a lot of things from probably from my
Sure.
childhood that that I'm not, yeah, I don't know.
Well, and what I've found in my experience, and I don't know if this translates to everybody, is that the supporters are way louder than the people who don't support. The people who don't support, for the most part, there may be a little vocalization or some words up front or whatever. But initially, they pretty quickly just fade away or quietly, you know, fade out of your life. And the people who are supportive actually really give the big hugs, have the embrace. It's like, wow, like it just mutes anything that you would deal with on the flip side.
Yeah, I think that and I just remembered too the one person, and again, it's just, I don't know, a happy moment from all that, and that just warms my heart is the one person that I know of from my childhood that was awkward and that was probably treated differently because of her awkward.
Yeah,
Um, she bought the book.
nice.
It's when I shared it. Yeah, so I thought that was really cool because we weren't super close back then, and I think that's one of the nice things. There's a lot of pros and cons to social media and Facebook in general. And to me, some of the connections that have been made or rekindled, whether it be family or friends or things like that, are what I have taken away from it. And the kind of, I guess, the richness of things like that
Yeah,
can happen when like I said, people grew up, and
yeah.
and I'm like, I'm so glad I connected with her because
Mhm.
I remember,
Right.
the days in school. Yeah.
And it's funny too how you can reconnect with somebody from that long ago. Not I'm not dating you. I just in my own head, it's a long time ago for me.
Oh, a long time ago.
And the the memories that we each have that were pivotal memories, the stories that were a big deal, there's some that overlap, but there's so many where it's like, do you remember this thing that was such a that time we dug a big hole in the backyard and it was this big thing and my mom was like, what'd you do? I'm like, I'm trying to remember that. And then I'll share something else. And they're like, did that really happen? It's like, were we in the
Yeah.
same neighborhood? Were we in the same class? Did we even grow up in the same house?
That's so funny. Yeah, speaking of which, did you do that? Because I totally did that with one of my girlfriends at her parents' house. We were gonna dig a pool.
Yes, we did that across the street at my best friend's house. And it was kind of like in her backyard, but a little bit more in the next door neighbor's yard, which might have been the problem.
Perfect.
It's like, what are you doing? It's like, yeah. And I think we were just digging
Good
to
time.
see how far we could, like, we're gonna hit lava, like in our head, we had this like, we're
Oh, of
digging so far, and
course.
it was
Yeah.
probably, 18 inches or something.
Yeah, but that childhood memories are really interesting. That's a whole other
Right.
a
Yeah, and
whole
it, and
other
it just
topic.
goes to show that, like, I love that you mentioned that your mom really made you not feel like you were without all the time, like that you still had a really good childhood, and that
Yeah.
like that your childhood is about those memories. It doesn't even have to be that you are taking fancy trips on spring break. And at the time, it may feel like I'm not doing what other people are doing. This doesn't feel so good. But then when you look back on it later, you're like, oh, I ran through the woods for hours on end, and these other kids weren't allowed to do that because they had to get on a plane and fly somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Lots of good memories of doing exactly that, making fun in the woods and lake. And yeah, I mean, just really quickly, one of the things that is a memory for me along those lines is, yes, we were poor. We were in, a poorer neighborhood. I think this kind of leads back to who I am today too. I have a vision of, we lived on the lake. We
Oh,
were on we were
yeah.
on waterfront property. I mean, our street ended at a big,
Wow.
and there was a big park. There was a big park where we would play,
Hmm.
football and baseball and whatever else out in that park. And we had a dock, and there was the lake,
Wow.
and somebody had a canoe that we would go out on. And so in my mind, great we had a
Mhm.
great place to live and a great opportunity to do. And but
Yeah.
again, those stories were never like, those stories were always told in a certain, I grew up on the lake, and
Right.
they were told a little different, but they were how I saw it. I mean, and when I think back on it, I'm like, what an opportunity that we had to have that. And all the kids in the neighborhood played out in that park and in the water, and
Yeah.
things that other people may not have had. So,
I love that. My
yeah.
sister told me a story one time that she shared in a speaking event she was giving, and it's the story of two different young girls, and essentially at the end of the story, it's the same her same childhood story, but from two different perspectives.
Mm.
And one is this, oh, this poor kid, like nothing's working out, and the other one's like, look at all this thing that was great. And it really is like we can both have two stories. And I almost need to call her and say, please retell me that story because I can't remember it. And it was so beautiful the way she told it. And
Yeah.
and I know that I have times where I can relate to that. And I think we all have things where it's like, okay, what are the two different versions of our lives that we are both like remembering and telling ourselves, and why not pick the better one if there's two
Right.
options? But
Yeah. Yep.
so Anne, beautiful story, beautiful. So happy I'm gonna get that book in my hand and get a couple copies so I can give them to some of the kids in my life. But I would love to know, how can we best support you? What do you have going on that you want the world to know about so that you can get some support out there with everything you're doing?
I would say a couple of things. I talked in the beginning about connectedness, and I think that's really important to me in a lot of ways. I truly believe in connecting with people, just as I connected with you. Um, I enjoy connecting other people. I really enjoy doing that, which is, kind of how I use my LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile, I love connecting with other people. And helping them connect with others. I don't want anybody filming anything, but I do like to connect with people truly. I think everything that I've done in my career or professionally has always involved connecting somebody or someone, which also interestingly, after college, I worked with Department of Corrections and I connected inmates with their children.
Oh wow.
Um,
Yeah.
so I've done that, and then I've over the last several years I've been and over the last several years I've worked in the association space and connecting speakers with educational activities. So I'm always interested in those opportunities to connect with other people that are in that space that are speaking or that are in the event organizing space. And because I do still feel like there's a really strong piece of that that's important to me to connect people and connect things
Right.
that make sense. And I also have an annual event that I've been putting on for the last few years called the Sleepover that connects entrepreneurial women. It's just a small retreat of about 10 women. So that's again a whole other thing that I could that I could go into.
Mhm.
But again, I guess going back to the childhood thing, it has a kind of a childhood, sleepover component feeling to it, and gives these women an opportunity to connect with each other and learn from each other, to support their businesses or their personal lives or whatever comes out of it. So again, back to the connection piece, I love being able to do that. So most of this information can be found through my LinkedIn profile, I would say. That's probably the best way for people to connect with me at this time. If I have other websites or anything else that would be helpful, it will either be there or can be there at some point. Um, yeah, so I think that's really it. I'm always happy and open to connecting with people and good people, good
I love
like-minded people.
Yeah, and that's how we ended up getting connected, was being in, great circles of people who are like, how do you not know Anne yet? And are you sure you haven't met? And
Yeah,
yeah, and it's great, and I can really feel how much you value connection. Just, it's the first thing you led with. It's your whole story talks about just being connected with people, and I feel like um that comes through in what you do.
yeah,
Yeah.
it lights me up. Yeah.
Definitely. It's great when you see someone doing the thing that they love doing, because you really do see a change in their mannerisms, their face lights up, as soon as you say, "Oh, well, what is it you're excited about?" And also it's like, "Oh, I get to talk about this." Like it's not just another meeting of like blah 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 blah, or I don't have to give some
Right,
report.
right,
And
right.
I love seeing that spark in people, where that shifts from the expectation of, oh, it's going to be another meeting, or it's another meet and greet where you go through this is what I do, blah, 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 blah. And what do you do? And you ask the same 10 questions. But then as soon as it's like, and tell me about connecting with people and what that means to you, and
Yeah.
why is it even important?
Can I tell you something else really quickly that just
Yes.
reminded me? That's another thing that carried over from my childhood to my adult life. I don't like to ask people what they do for a living because I dreaded that as a
Yeah.
kid, right?
Hmm.
So I didn't make the really,
No,
but
I
yeah.
agree. It's something I've made a very purposeful point not to ask when I meet people. And I still am working on different ways to get creative
Yeah.
with being like,
I
so
still want to know.
what are you passionate about? What do you do in your free time? What grabs your interest? And I keep trying to find different ways to ask that question. And inevitably, some people are just like, are you trying to ask what I do for a living? I was like, no, I'm just curious, like, what's your dream? What's your thing? But I
Yeah. What
also
do
am
you
not
do?
trying to put you too on the spot. And
Yeah. Yeah. It's helpful to know. It always, yeah, it's a trigger.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And it's hard not to feel like people are asking in a way to figure out where to place you on the level of importance in their life,
Right.
which
Right.
Like to me, I really don't care what you do for a living. I don't care if you work in a drive-through or fry fries or clean the streets or are an executive. I care about what you're passionate about. And if you say, you know what, I do this thing and that's what pays the bills while I pursue this dream or make this life the best life I want, whether that's so that I can go live in the woods alone or so I can start a family and just have a house that I raise my kids in, or because I want to travel everywhere. Like, I don't care what your thing is. I
Yeah.
just want you to have a thing. Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely.
Well, and I'm just curious how you would challenge people to own their awkward before we go.
Oh, how I would challenge them? I mean, I think that's the thing, and I think I mentioned this earlier, that I feel like it's becoming more acceptable in the professional world, which is crazy because I think it all goes back to just being human.
Mhm.
And we're all humans. We're all getting along in space as a bunch of humans. And if you can remember that that's the case and that we're all humans and that we can treat each other as other humans, there's all, I don't know, I think that just really helps me put things into perspective and reminds me. And it's crazy, and it feels weird, and I hear weird things from people like, oh my God, I don't know how you could. It's about vulnerability, and to
Mhm.
me, vulnerability is just about being human and just remembering that everybody else that you're around are all humans, are all
Right.
humans. So it's like it's weird to me to hear somebody say, "Oh my gosh, I can't," how brave of you, or I wish I could be that that open and brave. And then I go, feels really weird to hear that sometimes. But then I remember I've been in that place, and I think now my mind shift has changed so much to just by remembering that
R-
everybody's human.
Right. And I love that you call out not just remembering that everybody else is, but also that we are ourselves, because it's sometimes a lot easier to give the grace to someone else when we see what they're going through, but then we turn around on ourselves. It's like, no, I shouldn't have a struggle. I shouldn't have this and that. And yet,
Yeah,
we're our biggest bully. I say all the time. It's
100%,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Wow. Well, and there has just been so much to take in here. I absolutely love it. I always love catching up with you, and you're doing such amazing things, connecting amazing people, and it's beautiful to hear your story. Thank you very much for being here today.
yeah. Thanks for inviting me. It's been fun, and I enjoy sharing my awkward.
I love it. Thank you so much. And everybody else, be sure you go out there this week. And as always, own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.